Introduction to Proportions. Larry was planning a party for 12 people. His plan was to serve sandwiches, but he was not sure how many sandwiches he would need. He knew that one sub would feed 3 people. His friend Luke told him he needed to know about proportions if he wanted to solve problems like this. Today, you will learn how to work with proportions. Click Next to begin. A statement that has 2 equivalent ratios is called a proportion. Remember, a ratio is a comparison between 2 numbers. A ratio allows you to identify a relationship between 2 numbers. Imagine that for every 1 sub, you could feed 3 people. That would be a ratio of 1 to 3. You could also write that as 1/3. Since a proportion would be a statement that includes 2 equivalent ratios, 1/3 equal to 5/15 would be a proportion. That is, because 5 has the same relationship with 15 that 1 has with 3. But how can we be sure that 2 ratios are equivalent so that we can form the proportion? Click Next to find out. How do we prove that these 2 ratios are equivalent? To make fractions equivalent, you must multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. We can do the same for ratios. If we multiply the numerator and denominator in 1 to 3 by 5, then we see that 1 to 3 and 5 to 15 are equivalent. Click to learn another way to prove that ratios are equivalent. We know that 1 to 3 and 5 to 15 are equivalent ratios. We multiply the numerator and denominator in 1 to 3 by a common factor to prove that fact. Another way to prove that these are equivalent ratios is to find the cross products. We find the cross products by multiplying the numerator of one ratio by the denominator of the other. If the cross products are equal, then the ratios are equivalent. 1 times 15 is equal to 15, and 3 times 5 is also equal to 15. Since the cross products are equal, 1 to 3 and 5 to 15 are equivalent. Click Next to find some equivalent ratios that form proportions. Remember, a pair of equivalent ratios form a proportion. Which pairs of ratios are equivalent and therefore form a proportion? Check all that are correct. Sometimes an unknown variable requires you to use the cross products method to form a proportion. Consider this problem. If you wanted to find the missing value, it would not be easy to find a factor that when multiplied by 3 yielded a product of 8. A situation like this calls for you to use the cross products method. We multiply across to get 8 times 15 is equal to 3 times n. This gives us 120 is equal to 3n. So, n is equal to 120 divided by 3. Therefore, 40 is equal to n, so n is equal to 40. Click Next to try one yourself. Solve for the unknown in this proportion statement. Choose the correct answer. Now let's get back to Larry's problem. Larry plans to have some friends over for a party. He knows that one sub will feed 3 people. How many subs does he need for 12 people? Remember that 1 sub to 3 people is a ratio. We need an equivalent ratio that will describe a certain number of subs to 12 people. Larry could either use the cross products method or the equivalent ratios method to solve this problem. Click Next to solve this problem. Choose the correct number of subs Larry will need to feed everyone. Today you learned about proportions. You learned that a proportion is a statement that contains 2 equivalent ratios. You can prove that ratios form a proportion by using the cross products method or by solving for equivalent ratios. You also learned that you can use either of these methods to find a missing value in a proportion. Please review any information that you do not understand.